The problem that was identified actually in one of the earliest conversations between Hoover and the new President Johnson after the assassination was this issue of Mexico City. And they talked about it very plainly. And Hoover conveys to Johnson that actually the man in the photos and the man on the audio does not appear to be Lee Harvey Oswald. Hello and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, then welcome. I'm Jess, Connell, and I would love to earn your subscription today. Well, we are going through a systematic look at the JFK assassination through a variety of literature, meaning we are not just taking one person's perspective and running with it for the entirety of our journey. We are actually trying to get an accurate and beat by beat telling of the lead up to the assassination, as well as the actual activities that happened on November 22nd and thereafter. We have gone through some of the books here and here, some that are up on a shelf up there, and today we will be looking at two books in particular from a man named Mark Lane. Now, I do want to mention by name, I haven't always done this, but Rick from California was the one who provided me with many of the resources that we are looking at in this entire series, but especially today. I believe he sent me both of these. So thank you, Rick. We are all benefiting from your generosity. I'm so grateful you reached out to send those. I'm humbled by it, and I want to be a good steward of the literature that you shared. So I feel really excited about this series because it is the familiar story that we all know of the assassination, but because we are going through so many different kinds of books, different angles, different tones, some more academic and well-researched, some more conversational, it's really providing a nice variety for me. I hope it's the same for you. Today, I want to talk about Mark Lane's books. And the first one that he wrote was this book, Rush to Judgment. He created a film by the same name. It is 100% worth your time. It's here on YouTube. You should check it out. And in fact, you will benefit in a global way in your understanding of the JFK assassination if you just sit down and watch his film, Rush to Judgment. It's dozens of witnesses that he sat down with and just lets them tell their story, almost all of whom had not been brought before the Warren Commission, some of whom were brought before the Warren Commission, but in some way had their testimonies either allegedly altered, or when they got to critical points in the questioning would be steered away from the information that we all wish we had. So very interesting. Thankful for Mark Lane. One of the things I've learned about him in the last couple of months was that Mark Lane had gotten to know the Kennedys through political activity in Massachusetts. And so he had a personal relationship, not deep, but he had met with them multiple times as a politically active man in the Northeast before the time of the assassination. So then when the assassination happened, he used his lawyer skills to start digging, and that's how we get to the Rush to Judgment. Well, later he wrote this book, Plausible Denial. You can see from the subtitle, Was the CIA Involved in the Assassination of JFK? And then the book that I didn't have, and didn't even know about actually, was called Last Word, My Indictment of the CIA in the Murder of JFK, from Mark Lane. We're going to end up reading a lot of this one, but I wanted to start with Plausible Denial because this is the first place where he mentions the Mexico City trip, which is what I wanted to talk to you about today. That's going to be the primary topic we're going through, and this is the perfect vehicle to do it because when you look at the Mexico City trip that Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly took about a month and a half before the assassination, there's so many questions about it. It is a very odd set of circumstances, and I still have a lot to learn on this matter. I do want to point out, now I can't say unequivocally because I did not read all of it yet, but I don't believe that rush to judgment it definitely doesn't go in depth. It's not a major topic. It's not in the back, and it's not in the table of contents about the Mexico City trip. By the time he gets to plausible denial, he has definitely looked at the Mexico City trip, and he has a message to deliver to us. In plausible denial, we're only going to read a very little bit of this one. He says, at the outset, it should be understood that almost all of the information regarding Oswald's alleged visit to Mexico and his contact with the Soviets and Cubans while there had been fabricated by the Central Intelligence Agency. In its report, the Commission cited the CIA as the primary source for the Mexico City scenario, declining to seek independent corroboration for the CIA's version of events. Nevertheless, the Mexico City scenario constitutes the conventional wisdom as promulgated by the CIA and accepted by the Warren Commission. It remains an article of faith for those who subsequently endorsed the Warren Report, including journalists and official investigating committees. One of the central tenets of the lone assassin theory is Lee Harvey Oswald's presence in Mexico City. So the gist of the Mexico City situation is that Oswald allegedly, in the weeks, about 6 weeks before the assassination, went to Mexico City unbeknownst to anyone and sought out an agent in the case of the Soviet embassy, and at the Cuban embassy sought to make contact and get visas in order to travel. And I suppose the allegation would be that that would provide him with somewhere to go after the assassination. The problem that was identified actually in one of the earliest conversations between Hoover and the new President Johnson after the assassination, I believe in the first 48 hours, if not the first 24 hours, was this issue of Mexico City. And they talked about it very plainly. And Hoover conveys to Johnson that actually the man in the photos and the man on the audio does not appear to be Lee Harvey Oswald. So that presents the first mention that was covered up. That whole audio conversation was deleted, but in the 90s, the actual transcript for that was retrieved, and therefore we know what was said between the two men. And it's interesting that so soon after the assassination that would be the flashpoint that they are paying attention to. So that indicates that it's something significant. There's something going on with this trip to Mexico City. And indeed, Mark Lane provides an entire section of his book around this topic of Mexico City. We're going to read some of it. Before we get into our reading, I just want to say, why is this useful? Why do we need to know this? What is the significance of this information? Well, one thing that the doubles does for us, as we consider why would anybody be impersonating an unimportant, poor man who was had been politically anathema, a betrayer of our nation. Why would anyone be imitating or impersonating that man before the assassination? That's one important question that we've already uncovered in this series. Another important question would be, why was someone doing it in Mexico City, seeking out contact with two nations that we had tenuous relationships with at the time? So we're looking at, why would that be the case if it was Lee Oswald? And if it wasn't Lee Oswald who made these contacts, then why did someone do it impersonating him? What would be the motive there? Let's consider these things together as we read. David Atlee Phillips was fond of his location in Mexico City. Above all, he was gratified by the political climate. His organization could have chosen Washington, D.C., Langley, Virginia, or New York City. But there were local and state police agencies there, some of them inquisitive. And there was the ever-present New York Times and Washington Post. And his work, especially now, required the absence of prying eyes. Phillips one of the highest ranking officials of the CIA, was responsible for all operations of the Central Intelligence Agency to be carried out in the Western Hemisphere. The newspapers were not bothersome, and the police authorities had long since been co-opted. Mid-level officers were fed secret intelligence, and then they would raise through the ranks, knowing that they owed their careers to the CIA. So if you didn't catch that, local authorities in Mexico City would be fed low-level intelligence that would help them along in their career, and as they rose, they would know, I owe some things to the CIA. I have a debt of gratitude that I owe. So I need to, look the other way when they tell me to, or I need to kind of keep with the agenda that they have. Those open to bribery were easily recruited. And the few important officials who were loyal to their own country were placed in situations, filmed, sexual assignations was one device, so that their cooperation and silence was extorted. This is still a method of control. For those reasons, the CIA chose Mexico City rather than a city in the U.S. to make plans that directly involved the United States. David Atlee Phillips worked assiduously and established the legend that a man, to be selected shortly, had been to Mexico City, and while there, visited both the Soviet and Cuban embassies. A search of intelligence files resulted in a few candidates, but one appeared most satisfactory. Lee Harvey Oswald had ties to the intelligence community and had been interviewed by a CIA asset, Priscilla Johnson, as soon as he had arrived in Moscow. Sufficient false information would be fed to J. Edgar Hoover. He would soon after the assassination declare that Oswald had been the assassin and had acted alone, and then no agent of the FBI would dare find any evidence that could lead to a contrary conclusion. Priscilla Johnson, on behalf of the CIA, but posing as a news reporter, would release her version of the interview she had conducted with Oswald in 1959, stating that Oswald hated his country. Of course, as we've noted in our read-through, that assumes that he was acting on his own, which is a very difficult pill to swallow when you consider he didn't even have the money to get where he got. It's very difficult to think that Oswald came up with all of that on his own, somehow manufactured his defection, somehow achieved getting out of the Marines early, somehow pieced together the money needed to get to Helsinki, somehow pieced together the money needed to buy a luxury travel time in Moscow. That's a lot to swallow. And so then the fact that he may have been controlled or planted to be in that position as a false defector completely changes the way we should understand his interview with Priscilla Johnson while there. Of course, he would be claiming to hate his country, to be intending to defect, to be intending to completely yield his citizenship, which are the things that he claimed to the embassy when he went. And yet he never did revoke his citizenship. He never did actually go through the motions of defecting. He just said he was giving up his citizenship. In attempting to design an inescapable trap for Oswald, Phillips was troubled by what he considered to be the possible fatal obstacles to the plan. Oswald would deny that he had been to Mexico City and might be able to provide proof that he was elsewhere at the time. That will not be a problem, he was assured. Oswald will not live to defend himself or even talk to a lawyer. There remained the problem of Oswald's wife. Marina might have some information. Well, she was to be immediately taken into custody by the Secret Service and denied access to counsel. Later, the CIA arranged for the same Priscilla Johnson to spend time with her, and Marina was told that if she didn't remain silent, she would be deported to the Soviet Union. All of these things would be motive for any woman in her vulnerable position to think carefully before they offered evidence to the contrary of a powerful government. The CIA and David Atlee Phillips developed the legend that Lee Harvey Oswald had been to Mexico City during September 1963. That assertion was not true, yet the complicated legend that the CIA constructed about Oswald's journey to Mexico became the basis for removing Warren and his commission as independent investigators. According to the legend, Lee Harvey Oswald was in Mexico, primarily Mexico City, from September 26th until October 3rd of 1963. He visited the Cuban embassy on September 27th, 1963, and was observed there by Sylvia Duran, a Mexican national employed by the embassy. Duran provided a written statement about her observation, which the CIA could present. The man who identified as Oswald was given to angry and memorable outbursts and became very excited or angry. The legend also stated that on October 3rd, 1963, Oswald called the Russian embassy. He asked to speak with Comrade Kostin, codename for Valery Kostakov, and inquired if there were any messages for him, establishing that he had a continuing relationship with that Soviet official. According to the CIA, Kostakov was really a KGB staff officer. Oswald allegedly was photographed entering and exiting from the Soviet embassy. The CIA possessed those photographs. Oswald's telephone calls to the Soviet embassy were furtively recorded by the CIA, and those recordings were also in possession of the CIA. Mark Lane tells us, when I first read the Warren Commission report about 45 years ago, I had doubts about the veracity of the conclusion that Oswald had been to Mexico City. After studying the 26 selected volumes of testimony and evidence later published by the Commission, I was almost certain that the CIA had contrived the story and that Dulles had misled his fellow commissioners. So I think that explains why perhaps it wasn't a major focus here. He was focusing on the major issues concerning the case, and yet wasn't quite sure because of the initial report that later was elucidated much more extensively in the 26 volumes, that he wasn't quite sure. He doubted that it had happened, but later, once he evaluated the 26 volumes, he had the evidence that showed him that his doubts were justified. Later, when the government was compelled to produce many of its files that had been designated top secret, it became clear that the CIA had established a legend for Oswald, attributing to him a series of actions in which he had not been involved. Although Oswald had been silenced, his wife, then in custody and under the control of the U.S. Secret Service, continued to state that Oswald had not been to Mexico City. I was puzzled about why the CIA, having insisted that Oswald had acted alone and that there had been no conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy, had also created the challenging and mutually exclusive story that Oswald had met with Russians and Cubans at their embassies in Mexico just 2 months before. According to the CIA, he assassinated the president. The two notions seemed at odds with each other. So the point he's making is, if it's just this crazy guy who acted alone, he just kind of went off the rails, took an opportunity, realized he was in the right place at the right time, and decided, strike while the iron's hot. I'm going to make myself, famous now. If that's what he was, then that's the story. But then, if that's the story, why have this other story that connects him with our two arch enemies of the Russians and the Cubans? That these two things are in contradiction. That if he's just a lone gunman, crazy, Looney Tune, not put up by anybody, he's just acting on his own, that's one thing. Or he's a guy who is going off the rails, connecting with our enemies in all sorts of crazy ways. That's a different story. One would lead us to war. The other is just, man, what a crazy coincidence that he was in the right place at the right time and happened to be unnoticed by our awesome Secret Service. That's that story. But this story is something different. There's way more footwork happening in this version of the story. So Mark Lane is saying, I didn't understand why the CIA would create the story if this was what they were wanting to get people to believe. He says the Oswald legend was for the benefit primarily of the commission, but at the foremost of that would be for Chief Warren. He says, The Oswald legend of the Mexico City adventure was presented to Warren as for your eyes only report. It effectively froze him into inaction. And Mark Lane asserts that this was the intent. The lone assassin concept, with no reference to the implications of the fabricated Mexico City story, was for public consumption. Indeed, we didn't hear anything about Mexico City publicly. There wasn't a focus on it. It wasn't deemed significant for the public consumption. So he's saying that the reason why the story was concocted was for there to be the potential for the risk of war or nuclear problems. And so if that risk is there, then that makes the Warren Commission and Chief Warren himself highly controllable. Regarding Oswald's presumed visit to the Soviet embassy, the CIA told Warren that it had a plethora of unquestionable documentation. Warren was told that the CIA had already examined all of the evidence and had concluded beyond doubt that Oswald had been the assassin and that he had acted alone, thereby obviating the need for further inquiry by the commission. So they were told, look, we've already looked into this. The CIA has everything. Trust us. We've looked into it. He has for sure acted alone. That conclusion merely restated the position taken by Hoover, the FBI, and Dallas authorities after the murder in Dealey Plaza. Since the commission had previously decided not to retain its own independent investigators and to rely primarily upon the CIA, the FBI, and the Dallas PD, an additional investigation would simply be redundant, he's informed. The CIA warned Warren that a further inquiry into the facts was not only unwarranted and superfluous, but would imperil the security of the nation and might lead to the death of many Americans, which is the same risk that President Johnson had informed Warren about when he essentially begged and strong-armed him into being the Chief Justice that would take on the commission, that he would head the commission. Chief Justice Warren initially did not want to, and I believe 3 times he rejected the offer. But eventually, when he was told that there were Cuban and Russian ties and that if he didn't chair it, and if the commission didn't find that it had been Oswald and Oswald alone, that it could lead to the deaths of millions. Well, this is the same train of thought, that not only do you need to chair it, but also we don't need independent investigations because already you could just trust us, like the CIA, the FBI, the Dallas PD. We've already done our legal footwork and you can trust what we've done. So there's no need for an independent investigator to do more than what we've already done. We'll provide you with a list of witnesses. We'll tell you what we found. We'll give you our list of evidence and you can trust us because we are the elite investigators here. The CIA told Warren that Oswald's journey had been established by numerous incontrovertible facts. Subsequently, when it was established beyond doubt that Oswald had not been in Mexico, the CIA's elaborate series of charades that went on there provided evidence that the CIA, had been involved in planning the assassination for at least 2 months before it had taken place. Again, look at the title of the book, My Indictment of the CIA in the Murder of JFK. He is making the claim that the CIA was certainly behind the fabrication of this legend for Oswald, that he had been in Mexico City, that he was reaching out to various embassies trying to get connections with the KGB and visas to Cuba. That's the legend that they've created. And remember, we've already talked about the sheep dipping that happened in New Orleans. Let's make him look like he's a wild communist. Yeah, he was engaged with the white Russian community in Dallas, which is anti-communist. But now that he's down in New Orleans, boy, he's handing out handbills. He's getting on radio shows. He's really making some waves and making some noise, and everybody's noticing. He even gets arrested for a street fight. All of this proving what a wholehearted communist this guy is. He is such a Marxist. He is so into this political system that he is really making a mess of his life over it. Okay, that's the picture that was presented and established in New Orleans. Now we're seeing this other thing that's connected to other governments and putting him in a different light in Mexico City. When some members of the Warren Commission became suspicious about the legend and asked for these CIA cables, the cables being all the evidence and the various communiques that had gone out collecting data about Lee's time in Mexico City, then CIA Director Helms admitted that the CIA had censored the evidence before allowing the Chief Justice and other members of the President's Commission to review it. So they're saying, well, we already classified that information. We censored it. So that's why you don't have the evidence. It's already been classified. The CIA continued to refuse to show its cables, dispatches, and other documents in its possession to the Warren Commission, claiming that they contained code words and digraphs which would be unintelligible to a person not familiar with them. So they're saying, look, this stuff contains information that wouldn't even make sense to you. Just take our word for it. Like, we already classified it, but we're telling you we did a bang-up job on this investigation, and you can trust us. Plus, I mean, the reports themselves wouldn't even make sense to you because they have all sorts of codes that, you know, the average person couldn't even untangle. The entire story about Oswald being in the Cuban embassy was a fiction created by the CIA. Oswald had never been to Mexico City. The photograph provided by the CIA of the man at the entrance to the Soviet embassy was not a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald, as even the CIA was later forced to concede. 7 different FBI agents interviewed Oswald on November 22nd and 23rd. They obtained a copy of the CIA recording of the man who identified himself as Lee Oswald while talking to the Soviet embassy. According to an FBI report, they all agreed that the person on the tape was not Lee Harvey Oswald. The "not" is all caps. So meaning all 7 FBI agents were like, that is definitely not the guy that we've been talking to for 2 days. So the photograph of the guy going into the Soviet embassy wasn't him. The audio of the guy speaking to the Soviet embassy was not him, and they all agreed. While not one shred of evidence connecting Oswald to the Mexico City scenario was presented, there was substantial evidence demonstrating that he had never been to Mexico City. His widow said that Lee had never been to Mexico City and could not have been there without her knowledge while she was living with him. So that's the end of our reading today. It's going to be short and sweet. This is the reading that we have for today. But the one thing that I wanted to say about this is that this is not a comprehensive look at Mexico City. There is more information available now. And I would point you to Matt Crumpton's Solving JFK podcast if you're interested in getting into the weeds on this. He has interesting information about people who purportedly shared a bus ride with Lee Oswald and other details. So if you're interested in that, I just want you to know that there is more information beyond what's been presented here in this episode. So you may want to do that, but this is our look at Mark Lane's texts, primarily through this book, Last Word, My Indictment of the CIA and the Murder of JFK. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Let me know in the comments what stands out to you. Let me know what questions you have about Mexico City. I would love to hear from you on that. The other thing that I have to share with you is that the very next episode comes courtesy of a woman named Kathy in Arkansas. So thank you, Kathy. She just reached out to me I think over the weekend or something. I don't even know. And 2 days later, 3 days later, I'm holding this book in my hands, Texas in the Morning by Madeline Duncan Brown. I'm so grateful to this entire community, but specifically to people like Rick and Kathy. I feel so grateful. I wouldn't be able to afford these books, I can tell you. We have a large family, I have a busy life, and we don't have heaps of money just sitting around waiting to be spent on obscure books. And so for you to offer this book to me is really a generous gift, Kathy. Thank you so much. Next time, we're going to be coming back and reading Madeline Brown's account of the Murchison Party. So come back for that. If you know about the Kennedy assassination, you know that one of the critical questions that people point to as to whether or not Texas oil men were involved and whether or not Lyndon Johnson had any foreknowledge of the assassination is this alleged Murchison Party that reportedly happened the night before the assassination. So come back for Texas in the Morning by Madeline Brown. We're going to read the selection about the Murchison Party. Looking forward to that with you guys. I hope you have a great day. I can't wait to hear from you on this one. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about Mexico City. It's still something that I feel I need to learn a lot more about. I actually intend to go back through some of those episodes on solving JFK, and this is one that I know it's something I need to shore up. So I hope this furthered you along on your journey a little bit in understanding the Mexico City part, but I understand you may still have some questions. So leave those in the comments. Let me know what you have to say. I look forward to hearing it, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.